Hello. Should we all do like the icebreaker question or did we already do our names and stuff like that?
I just got here, but I guess we can do the icebreaker
Yeah,
questions.
let's do
No,
the icebreaker because I
we have
think
to do
I'll
an
just start off.
introduction though first. So
Yeah, let's
Okay,
do that.
perfect.
yeah, so just like name, major, year.
Um, okay, I'll go first. My name's Yabarak. My major is political science, and is there a third question? I'm trying to pull that.
What year are you in?
And I'm junior, or I guess rising senior.
Mhm. I guess I'll go next. I'm Peyton. I'm a mass communication and advertisement major, and I'm a sophomore, rising junior.
Okay, I'm Aeon and I'm a senior and my major is Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness.
I'm Michaela. I'm a senior, and my major is political science.
Oh wait, no, I think you're muted if you're trying to talk.
Yeah, my bad. Noah, history major, um, senior going into graduate school.
Awesome. All right, let's see.
I think there's a second part of the icebreaker. It says like which unit during the second half of class did you enjoy the most and then tell us why.
Hmm.
So like yeah, either units 7, 8, 9, or 10.
Uh, um, I guess like maybe the last unit, unit 10 for me, because I mean, the podcast, they were very much all about Trump and everything like that, but they were interesting. Trump and Lindsey Graham, they have a weird relationship, so it's kind of interesting to see that.
Yeah, mine is also probably going to be unit 10 just because the episodes they weren't as long as like other podcast episodes we've listened to in class, but they were still like engaging and like I learned a lot through them, especially with Lindsey Graham. I didn't realize like it's just kind of interesting to see how people get like manipulated and like turned into something that is like
Or like
so far from their
coerced.
original
Yeah.
ideals.
Yeah. I mean, I also really liked Unit 10, but I also liked Unit 9. I liked how Dr. Bloom, I think that's how you pronounce it. I liked how her analysis on how she sort of infiltrated the Tea Party and was able to see from the inside how they grew as a movement, or as a faction, as like we should say, I guess. But I found that really interesting, especially because she used a lot of her personal experience being in those circles and integrated that into her writings.
Yeah, I would say my favorite was also Unit 9. Just the whole idea of like intra-party factions and how they kind of operate as like not a full political party, but almost like a separate movement. And they brought up a couple of examples of like the new right from Barry Goldwater in like the early 50s and stuff like that, but how that's sort of developed into like I remember when I was little, the GOP was not the exact way that it is right now. The reason why it is the way that it is right now is because of one massive intra-party faction, which has basically changed the entire party. So that was my favorite out of all of them.
Yeah, I really like the deep dive on how sort of, I guess, parasitic the Tea Party was, and how they sort of successfully changed the party from the inside, which I guess is like the envy of a lot of maybe like more left-leaning Democrats who I really see, or not, I guess they wouldn't self-identify as Democrats, but I saw a lot of parallels between uh, people on like the left side who really have intense goals to try and change the Democratic Party from the inside. Um, I guess that's just a commonality between sort of, I wouldn't say extreme. I wouldn't want to equivocate the two, but I guess more extreme ideologies.
I would say my favorite unit was probably 10, just because like I didn't realize like Lindsey Graham was like at first like so against like Trump and like speaking out. Like I don't really remember much from like 2016, like during that time. And then I like right now, like I really just only like heard like, like Lindsey Graham just being like so for Trump, like Trump, Trump, Trump. And I just thought it was very interesting to kind of see how not just him, but like also other politicians just went from like going against Trump to like slowly like being for Trump and just being like very advocate for like pretty much anything that he does.
Yeah, I think we'll get into it later, but like Unit 9, like Lindsey Graham is basically a product or like a perfect example of what Unit 9 is all about. Like he's someone who was a part of the old GOP and operated in a specific way, but then as soon as he realized that, he would not be as popular if he didn't go with the movement, like he would be left behind for new age Republicans. So yeah.
Yeah, because he was like calling Trump like a bigot and all this other stuff, and now you're just like, yeah, like I'm for Trump.
Okay, well, should we move on to the first set of questions?
Yeah, since
Yeah,
it's only five people, I think we only have to speak for 75 minutes, so that's 5:15 instead of 5:30.
5:15.
Yeah,
Okay.
so
Well, I mean, I'll go ahead and open this up. What did you know, if anything, about the fallout of the 2020 election prior to listening to reading the ballot battles chapter in the January 6th report? Um, well, what did I know about it? I remember waking up on the morning of January 6th and looking at my phone and just that being a whole disaster. But the fallout I remember was very messy because obviously it was incorrect what had happened. But what you had is you had had a lot of Republicans and mainly Trump who was trying to defend the people who were doing it and also trying to deflect the blame away from himself when in reality, like that's the big problem for me, I think, about the 2020 January 6th is that he was really trying to deflect the blame away from himself and saying like, oh, I didn't make these people do all this stuff. But in reality, he was he literally had instigated this entire thing since he had lost the election. He had called out voter fraud and he had made his followers feel aggravated and feel like they had to make a stand for something. And if you go to interviews from that day of people like, talking about it, like all of their motives of people storming the Capitol and trying to do that is to overturn the election results and to ensure that Trump gets his rightful victory, which it just obviously was not.
so and this is question 1A, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I guess what I knew was mostly about, what everyone else knew. I remember, I think I had a Zoom class that day. And I remember like my mom had the TV on and uh, she sounded like she, started cursing, being like, oh my God, like what's happening? Um, and I guess that was like the first time that I really figured out how serious all the because I remember seeing everything about the election lies on social media, in real time when it was happening. But I guess that was the first time I was confronted with how serious it actually was.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really know too much about it before, like listening and reading into the podcast and things like that, but I definitely found out later like how serious it was for sure with like how Trump is so like I mean like he was just so adamant on like making sure everybody knew how, widespread voter fraud was happening or something like that or like just making false claims, I feel like. Yeah.
I feel like for this, I mean, obviously, I think that tensions and like the polarization of the country was already like so visible at that point. But I think the January 6th, like that whole storming the Capitol thing, I think that was like a wake-up call for a lot of people, and that like this is real. Like, um, the country hasn't been more like divided than ever now, and I think like it was also just like traumatizing that because I know like a lot of my friends' parents, they're working in DC too at the time, and it was like they were freaking out because they were like, I don't know what's gonna happen and if they're okay. So I think it was just like a genuine wake up call for America.
Think for me, like when like it first like started happening, from like what I like remember, I just remember like on like social media and stuff, people like showing like I think like some of the people there were like live streaming or something. And then they have like the different like people took like different photos of like the politicians like rooms and stuff. And then especially like the tragic when the cop got killed and that lady got killed, it was just like traumatizing. And it was just like at first like Trump was like, oh I called them off or whatever and it's not my fault. And then just realizing like he really just started all of this and had these pe some of these people just lives just lost. Those two people lives lost. It was just crazy that day.
Yeah, to speak a little more about like the political polarization. I mean, it had been happening for a long while, but I think it was, you know, it was really, really exacerbated, certainly by the pandemic, I feel like. And then like this was sort of like the breaking point for the followers of the GOP or the new GOP, I'll call it, because it's to me it's not the current Republican Party is not what it used to be. And yeah, I think they were just at a boiling point and they were aggravated and they were fed lies. And those lies made them feel as if that they had the power to go challenge our institutions, which is a little backwards to me because it feels like that they we pride ourselves on how good our institutions are, and obviously the American right is more nationalist than the American left. So the fact that they like to pick and choose which ones they question the integrity of, I just found that to be like contradictory. And but yeah, we were certainly at just a boiling point.
Do you guys want to move on to the B question?
Yeah, the what is it? Question B, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, in your opinion, what were the most interesting, surprising, maddening, etc. moments in the January 6th report summary?
Um, I don't know if I don't know if this is really surprising or maddening, but it definitely is interesting. It, definitely uh, put on paper something that both Trump and a lot of his allies have been denying, which is that he did, in fact, um, encourage his followers to uh, storm the Capitol. And he did, in fact, try to pressure Mike Pence to throw the election in his favor, um, which, of course, we all knew that, but having that be on the record, on paper, it can really go to prove against any sort of like lies that the people on his side try to push.
Yeah, I would say like I'll say maddening because maddening is like the perfect adjective to sort of describe this entire situation. But um, the level of, I think that 2020 was the last point where there was still remnants of Republicans who weren't all just fully for Trump. I feel like now it's just like overwhelming. Like all of the Republican candidates align themselves with that because that's currently the Republican voter base. But the most maddening thing is that how you had governors and other like electoral workers who were like in Arizona, I remember this is, before the riots, but like how they were not wanting to recount because they were confident and they're like, we lost. Like it is what it is, but you have to respect the political process. And you still had people like trying to twist the words and like trying to make it seem like there was a way that Trump had won the election. And I really feel like that's what fed into the riot is that you had people even on the right at the time who were saying like, no, like these are the results, like it's not what we wanted, but like that's democracy, that's how this works. So we have to respect that no matter what the outcome is. But the the delusion on the Trump side of the GOP was just so far bent that they convinced themselves that it didn't actually happen. And again, when you tell thousands, I don't remember how many people were there, but I'm guessing at his rally, like when he left, probably north of 30,000 or something. When you tell 30,000 people, like, you've been wronged, like, you've had an election stolen from you, et cetera, they're going to make rash decisions. And that's exactly what happened. So, and then to add on to maddening, like, the way that Trump was just trying to deflect it all away from him, like, oh, I didn't tell these people to do that, when he was literally the main mouthpiece to people wanting to overthrow the government.
Anyone else have an opinion about anything in the January 6th report? Well, the next question is also about it, so I guess I'll answer that. How did reading through the January 6th report make you feel about contemporary US politics? Definitely a lot more depressed. It really is interesting how we are at a time of increasing. I guess the only word I can think of is just like ridiculousness in modern day politics. Just the ways that overt lying and destruction of our institutions is not only um, not making the current president as unpopular as I personally think he should be. Um, it's also dividing the nation in a way that I feel like we probably haven't seen, um, at least since the '60s. But some people say since the Civil War. I personally think that's a bit of an exaggeration. But yeah, definitely did confirm a lot of depressing ideas I already had about the modern state of U.S. politics.
Yeah, I can agree with you on that. Like it's how I felt about it for real was just kind of like it made me feel like the American democracy was very fragile. Like just looking through or just seeing how the president was kind of willing to just overturn a very legitimate election and just how many people were kind of ready to have his back behind it. It just kind of showed, like you said, like division. And it just made it seem like democracy was very fragile here. That's what I got from that.
Um, I think as a country that is supposed to act as the model of democracy for the rest of the world, allowing something like this to happen and allowing this to get out of control just kind of put all of our political processes into question for a lot of people, when in reality, like that is not at all how it should have been. Like to go back to the voting, like people were like trying to convince themselves that COVID-19 is a ploy to get people to vote online or through the mail so that they can corrupt it in some way, when like I don't know, people have been voting online and through the mail like since voting has been a thing. I mean, not everyone can show up to the polls on time. It's like we have the infrastructure to be able to handle something like that. And the people who were, supportive of Trump should know that. But the thing is that they're convinced to go against that idea. And for me, it's just like, how could we even get to this point? Like, there is just no reason to why we should be putting our institutions into question. Like, there's actual countries where there is voter fraud and where there is problems. However, the United States, like the leader of world democracy, is not one of them. But they are just trying to spin a narrative because essentially because they were sore that they lost. And for me, it was just like, if you weren't stuck in that bubble in for the 2020 election, if you were not stuck in that bubble of just like far right Trumpism, the writing on the wall that Trump was going to lose that election was so apparent, it was not even funny. The way that he handled COVID-19 was a disaster. The entire Black Lives Matter movement that happened that summer was, again, a disaster for his public reputation and everything. And it divided the country, but it made the country realize that the current institution was not good enough. So any neutral political commentator from the outside, let's say like outside the United States, could see that it was obvious. And in my opinion, even though this is not related, it is related, but not in the same way. For me, the exact same thing happened in this most recent 2024 election. I felt like the writing on the wall for Trump to win the election was very apparent. People were not happy with everything. And, those people who weren't happy then, I hope they're happy now because they're getting exactly what they deserve. So, yeah.
Um, Also, I said 5:15. I meant 5:45. We started at 4:30 not 4. But
Is it not
if
6 o'clock though? Sorry, I just want to make sure.
six, I on the rubric it says 6 o'clock. 90 minutes if you have six people, but I think we have five people only.
Yeah.
So she said 75.
Okay.
Yeah. But does anyone else have any thoughts, or do we want to do question two? Okay. Um, what did you know about the 2000 election prior to listening to the Fiasco podcast? I I did know that it was like down to Florida. I knew it was down to Florida, and I knew that it was a 500 vote difference. I remember learning about this in like civics class in eighth grade, but um, I did know that it was a really uniquely close election. But I did say that I do say that the podcast did definitely inform me about a lot of factors that led to why it was so close, because I never knew. I just knew that it was so close that I think the Supreme Court um, had to stop the recount process and sort of let it be in George Bush's favor. But yeah, I did learn a lot of new information about the process of how it got there. Um, to that sort of fiasco, I guess, on the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, I also knew that it was down to Florida as the determining state, and that it was just between Bush and Al Gore, but I didn't really know too much before listening to the podcast, especially about I guess the butterfly ballot that was mentioned and stuff like that. There was an episode on that, but that was new information to me. So
Yeah, so my prior knowledge about the 2000 election is same as you guys. Super close election between Al Gore and George Bush. That came down to Florida. And I remember because right now Florida is a Republican stronghold, but I remember when Florida was a massive swing state. And yeah, I think that it was really crazy how everything went down. One thing I do remember is there was this is a little personal story, but I remember this one kid when Trump had lost the 2020 election and they were calling for a recount when the election wasn't close at all. This is how deluded these people are, but he was like trying to tell me, he was like, "Oh, like don't you remember the 2000 election, how they did a recount and Bush won?" And I was like, "Yeah, but that was down to like 500 votes, not thousands, tens of hundreds of thousands." So, yeah, that was my prior knowledge before watching the podcast.
Yeah, that's pretty much all I knew was that it was just Al Gore and Bush and that it came down to Florida. Like going through like the unit, I didn't know about like the butterfly ballots and like the with Cuba, I forgot his name. The Oh, I forgot his
Elion,
name. Yeah,
Elion
Elion,
Martinez. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Thank you. I
That
didn't know
also was
anything
new to
about
me.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just like, I didn't know it was like so many different factors. Like all I knew was that it just came down to like Florida.
And I didn't know that I knew that like Cuban Americans in Florida were tended to be Republican now. But I thought that was a more recent phenomena, like post Obama. I didn't know that even pre-Obama they were um very open to voting Republican because I feel like back in like the 90s and before then, a lot of racial coalitions stayed pretty rigid when it come to their voting patterns, I feel like, especially before the internet.
Yeah.
So I found that to be a really interesting little tidbit that they have been leaning Republican for a while before
Yeah.
other like lit Hispanic
Yeah, I didn't
groups.
know that.
Cubans are very particular because obviously their country had a communist dictatorship with Fidel Castro. So they have consistently, anytime they get to America, they consistently come over and they vote right because they just have a preconception of, what broader social politics brings. Even though, in my opinion, the American left is just like not even.
Right.
Like
You
the
know, the
Democratic
issues with
Party
Fidel
is not a left party.
Castro wasn't healthcare. It probably was
Yeah.
like personal freedoms.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
But that was just the thing that was being whispered into their ear and that was on their
right.
shoulder.
Yeah. Did everyone answer a question?
Yeah, anyone
Or
else
everyone who
want
wanted to? Um, okay, I'll start E. In some ways, the story of the 2000 presidential election sounds like a scripted movie with Florida in the starring role. In what ways did Florida embody the perfect storm, thereby putting it front and center? Um,
I can start us off.
yeah, some sort of
So
stuff.
yeah, in my opinion, the way that they formatted this question is like absolutely correct. Florida was at the time absolutely like the perfect storm because the 2000s was, a different time than we're currently living in because the political balance of the country was a lot closer. People were not as radical and like coming out as radical was like kind of frowned upon. You're like pushed away because there's, a lot of the like political fallout, like of, the fall of the Soviet Union and that sort of thing. And all these things that were major political events were still very fresh. Now we're kind of disconnected from it. So people are starting to bring it up again. But certainly in somewhere like Florida, Florida was reliably Democratic, I would say, or like way more than it is currently for the Democrats. However, yeah, I mean, Florida was put front and center for a very obvious reason. I mean, everything that it went down and how it came down that close and how they had to have the US Supreme Court come in and stop the recount. I mean, it was just like the way that they structured this question saying that it was like a movie is very true because it really was. It was very dramatic. I mean, I wasn't there to experience it, but this is something like I maybe we'll get into it, but I saw one of the other questions was saying like, what if there was social media at that time? And I can only imagine. I mean, this was like when you think about presidential elections and like the ripple effect that this had on American politics, it's unforeseen. So yeah, I think that this was like a one in a million situation that happened in the most important political election in the world.
Right.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
And and like a fun fact, in the 2000 election, the state of New Mexico was actually closer than Florida. I think Gore won it by 300. I had to look this up, but the reason that Florida is always focused and probably put in the starring role is because the state of Florida had a lot of electoral votes, um, and it became the tipping point state instead of New Mexico, which only had, I think, like it was less than 10 from what I remember, and it wasn't enough to change the game in any direction. Um, so it was, like you said, down to the wire. It had 25 plus electoral votes that could have flipped the election either direction. Um, and that really created the perfect situation to allow it to be the focal point for the election, especially with stuff like the Elion Martinez case, which probably helped ignite a lot of uh, tension and attention towards Florida. Because I think that was a nationally recognized case. Like it was followed by the national news and not just local Florida politics. Um, so that also is another reason why Florida was put in the front and center.
Also, I think like the factors in the like voting process itself, like the ballot designs, and I think where you guys touched upon like the butterfly ballots, I think that also contributed to Florida becoming like the perfect storm, or like also making it seem like it's a movie because like you have all these voters that essentially, because I think the with the ballots they were confusing for voters, and I forget the exact design of it, but um, oh my gosh, sorry. They're just confusing, and I'm sure it doesn't help with the case like you had just mentioned of Elian Gonzalez, because I think it was they were fighting over the custody of him, like whether he was gonna send back to Cuba or if he could stay in the US. And then that just doesn't that does, I don't know, just fit the question into like how it could be like such a movie like role scripted type of situation. But yeah.
Anyone else add on top of that, or should we move on to the next question?
Next question.
Okay. In your opinion, and I'll start us off with this as well. In your opinion, what were the most maddening moments of the podcast? That is, what points in the podcast did you become the most exasperated, disappointed, etc., when learning about the 2000 election fiasco? So I know we already harped on it a little bit, but I think that the butterfly ballots were just like one of it's like how for for a country, again, I said it earlier, but for a country that is supposed to hold like the highest standard of elections, how could something like this ever happen ever? Like the fact that people were meaning to vote for Gore, but accidentally voted for Pat Buchanan, and then coincidentally, like, the Supreme Court just doesn't want to do a recount. That for me feels like it's kind of going against like the democratic responsibility of the voters. Um, and yeah, you just had voters who were being unnecessarily punished, who wanted to vote for Al Gore. And in my opinion, like the Supreme Court really, really should have persisted with this, because in an election where, like you said, like this state was the difference between winning and losing. And when it comes down to a couple hundred votes, every single vote matters. Every single vote. So they should have recounted it. They should have, if need be, just redo the entire election in the state of Florida without these ballots, with a very clear, you know, who are you voting for? No confusion whatsoever, and then recount it again, because this is something that just should not have ever happened. And yeah, for me, that is just the craziest thing. And also, even though I just said it, um, the Supreme Court stepping in to stop it. I'm not going to say that they did it intentionally, but again, this is the highest court. We don't, use international courts because our court system is apparently so good. So why can't we, for the most important process in our political process, not make sure that we dot all of our I's, cross all of our T's to ensure that the results are the results? And, the fact that they stepped in was just like that. The question says disappointed. As an American, that disappoints me because we're actively letting down our political process and the integrity.
Yeah, I also was actually going to say something that really stood out to me and also disappointed me was the fact that the Supreme Court stepped in the way that they did. Um, the fact that they had to stop the recount, not even finish a recount. It's still, there obviously there are theories one way or the other, but it's still pretty ambiguous about who would have won that recount, and who didn't have, who would not have won that recount. And another fun fact: one of the justices, Sandra Day O'Connor, um, she was on the record saying that she wanted to retire early. So she was trying to have a Republic, or yeah, no, she wanted to retire early. So that definitely probably influenced her ruling uh, in them trying to stop the recount, because having a Republican president would allow her to leave and also be replaced by someone that she is ideologically aligned with. Um, so yeah, maybe that is also another factor to why that Supreme Court case was ruled the way it was.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys. Honestly, like the butterfly ballot thing, I was also going to discuss that. That was something that I thought was pretty ridiculous. I was disappointed to know that they made it so confusing, especially for like the elderly voters. Like in the podcast, um, I got it. It was like 5.45 second timestamp, but it was talking about like how the elderly voters had a hard time, and I just feel like that shouldn't have happened. And then also to know that Florida's Secretary of State, I believe like her name's like Kathleen Harris, but she decided to just stop or put a halt to the manual recount, and that was a very critical part of the election on its own. And I was disappointed to see that happen. So yeah.
I think also to hop on to that, I think it was also kind of crazy. Like in the podcast, I think her name is Jackie Winchester. I think it was like towards the end of the podcast where they were like recounting the votes. And then she was saying that like some of the people that were like doing the recounts were just kind of like chucking them off to the side, being like, "Oh, these don't count, these don't count, these don't count." And it's like, well, if we're trying to do a fair recount, like why are you just like throwing away these ballots without like really like looking at them and see if I think it's called like the Chad, seeing if like actually like punch through and stuff, which I just found out that to be just crazy when you're like at first so, trying to do this recount, but then you just kind of like doing like just throwing the ballots away.
On question three.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if y'all
sure.
are good to move. What do y'all think
Yeah.
about the media influence one? I feel like that's a good one.
Um,
Yeah,
Which one, the top or the bottom?
Well, go down to question three, and then it's the one on the far right, media influence.
oh, I think she's just asking which one out of the
It's just two.
two.
Oh wait, am I tripping? Uh, I don't know. Someone else read the
yeah, this
question then, I
is
guess. Maybe I'm
hard to
looking at
read
the
on
wrong
the
thing.
spot.
So, okay, there's one question that talks about the former Florida Secretary of State, Catherine Harris, and then the question is like she said that the 2000 election wasn't a fiasco. Instead, she says that the media created the fiasco, and then it says, "Why? What do you make of Harris's assertion?" And then the second question is, imagine that social media existed in 2000s, and then like it didn't, only like less than 40% of the US
Uh,
households even had internet.
I'm My bad, y'all. I thought we were supposed to answer both of the questions in one of the sections, but
Oh no, you're good.
yeah, I kind of want to do the one about the social media because that for me is like the most like interesting, just like as a thought exercise.
Sure.
You know what
Yeah,
I
let's
mean?
do that. That's I feel
So
like we can do a lot with that.
yeah, so imagine that social media existed in 2000. It didn't, and only about 40% of US households even had very slow internet. In your opinion, how might social media and or communication technologies have impacted the fallout of the 2000 election? Now, I'm gonna go ahead and start us off by saying that this was, I can only imagine, and I'm almost 100% sure it was probably the most publicized thing in the world when it was happening. Because again, like US politics isn't just limited to the United States. The knock-on effect that it has across the globe is insane. I was in France last semester during the last election, and it was the only thing anyone was ever talking about. Like, especially in the lead up, like the weeks leading up, that's all people were talking about. They were talking about, the swings, like what's gonna happen. Like no one knew, and because it has such an impact on the world as we know it today. However, with that, people were just looking at what they were seeing on the TV or reading in the papers. That is not what social media is. Social media is a whole new animal. So, in my opinion, I think that social media would have, I think the hysteria would have just been turned up a lot more, especially with people on the left. You know, the activism on social media would have became similar to what we saw on the right with the election of Trump. However, or the Trump missing out on the 2020 election, excuse me. So I just think that the hysteria would have been turned up to the absolute maximum because when, not only was it like the election came down to a super fine margin, but the fact that the reasonings why it was coming down to a fine margin, like we were talking about the butterfly ballots, and that the Supreme Court backed out on it, I think you would have seen a lot of people, obviously majority of them on the left, really, really putting into question the political processes of the United States, and in turn putting in question the political processes of the world around us, like in other countries that modeled their democracies off of ours. Uh, But also, I think another thing that would have been like question was like our electoral college system. I think a lot of people have been having questions about that because, you know, a couple hundred votes, while if we didn't have and we just had a straight popular vote system where the people with the most amount of votes were to win, I still think that this would have been put into question because it's like, why are people just depending on the voters in like one state to dictate who wins an entire election? So yeah, one thing, 100% hysteria would have been way turned up, and I think that would have the results been different? No. However, the way that people perceived it and remembered it would have definitely had a way bigger legacy than it currently does. Because the 2000 election is a landmark moment in American politics for, the right or wrong reasons, depending on how you look at it, depending how you politically lean. But I think if we had social media, the hysteria and the outbreak of and the fallout of this election would have been a lot more stamped in books or in education and stuff like that. Like the 2020 election will be in coming years.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree that social media back then would have ignited a lot more divisiveness than they probably had at that moment, especially because media back then was a lot less fractured. So you'd only be getting your information from, uh, college educated CNN or Fox News journalist. Sure, one of them might be a little bit, partisan here or there, but it's nothing like people getting their info from random podcaster number 59 who says the most outlandish, crazy things that sort of ignite a lot more vitriol in the listener, which definitely contributes to a lot of division in our society today with politics. Um, and if that was probably happening back then I'd assume that things such as the Supreme Court ruling, like you mentioned, and uh, actions like the Secretary of State and her involvement, and the governor, Jeb Bush, who was the brother of George Bush, the candidate, both of their involvements in how Florida conducted their elections definitely would have probably been put under a larger microscope, or maybe would have been um, a larger motivating factor for the opposing side to try and rally and stop this in maybe a similar fashion to uh, how I wouldn't say their own January 6th, but you know what I mean. Um, just uh, contributing to the general mess that is social media mixed with politics that we have today.
I agree.
Honestly, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna make a quick statement that I agree. I feel like the Supreme Court itself would probably, knowing like how all the apps are now with TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, like people are very Twitter finger happy. Like they like to type, they like to make assumptions. I feel like the claims about voter fraud and about like the ballot manipulation would be blown out of proportion.
Yeah.
A lot of like false information would be spread a lot faster. And I think that the Supreme Court would receive like a lot of backlash based on like their part in everything. So I just wanted to add that.
Honestly, not like I think when you guys were talking about like hysteria and like that it would have been like an all-time high and like insane. I honestly think that there probably would have been I don't want to say like I guess more like violent or like violent approaches or reactions because that social media, as we know, like now it's like it's everywhere and it's always in someone's face or like you can't really escape it because you're always going to see like news or like a headline or something. And I think that like that would make people even like more I guess like enticed to like do something or like make a statement. Just like how a lot of people do use social media as like freedom of speech, like you can say whatever, almost like whatever you want on there. And I feel like that would, if it existed in 2000s, then it would have like created like a lot more probably like dangerous things too. But yeah.
Anyone else want to add on to that? Okay. Well,
We
shall
should
we move
probably
on
move
to
on
the
to
next?
Unit 9. We only have 20
Yeah,
minutes.
yeah, I'm looking at the time. Holy Christ.
We should spend 45
Okay.
minutes on Unit 8.
Well, to be fair, these ones are a lot shorter, so yeah. Let's go ahead. Let's get cracking. Which ones you guys want to do? Because we have to answer.
At least one or
Well, it says answer the questions and questions. So questions plural and at least one of the cells below. So we have to pick one and choose. Yeah.
Use at least one, three options, two parts each.
I say we. What do you guys think about rhetoric and priorities?
I mean, yeah, I don't mind that. What do
Yeah,
we find that?
sure.
All right, cool. I'll open this up for the first question. Although references to an organized Tea Party were fading by 2016, how did the Tea Party's success foreshadows Trump's rise to prominence in the Republican Party? Do you think that there would have been a President Trump if not for the Tea Party? I think this is a good question because oh man, this is why this was my favorite of all of the units because the way that they discuss inter-party factions was like highly interesting. Um, I think that the Tea Party and even parties before that, like I had said, the New Right from Barry Goldwater and stuff like that, almost normalized radicalism and normalized the idea, like they made people think that it was okay to think that these radical ideas, like, mass deportations or like let's build a wall for absolutely zero reason, they made this okay, and the Tea Party had set a perfect example of how you could create a successful intra-party faction by, in the podcast, they talked about how she had analyzed a multitude of like the websites and the rhetoric that they were using on these websites for the local tea parties and every single little district across the country, and how their message was unified. And it essentially created a hive mind, but like we see with President Trump. So do I think that there would have been a President Trump if not for the Tea Party? Unfortunately, yes, because I still think he would have ran for president, and I still think that his ideas would have been pushed to the forefront because, unfortunately, for poorly educated people, he's very good at making them believe things that aren't true by using lies. He's a pathological liar. So I think that there still would have been a Trump without the Tea Party. But the Tea Party, basically, I would not be surprised if the reasoning why he decided to run was because he saw how easily the Tea Party was able to manipulate and create an intra-party faction and gain political prominence within the Republican Party and almost pit other Republicans against each other. I think he saw that and was like, well, if they can do that, I almost certainly can do that. And that's exactly what he did. So, yeah.
Stick go. One question. So I also do think, I guess first I could answer, how did the Tea Party's success foreshadow Trump's rise to prominence in the Republican Party? It definitely did highlight the need for a populist sort of figure to lead these people, right? Um, After the election of Obama, and I guess seeing how popular he was when he came to the presidency. The conservative movements and conservative activists definitely felt like they needed to start from the beginning and try and preserve, sort of like look inwards, lick their wounds, which sort of probably allowed the ideologue nature of Tea Party activists to fester and sort of um, increase, as well as the rise of social media and blogs and online communities that help network different Tea Party groups together. It definitely did sort of create the perfect echo chamber to produce the type of voter base that would be appealed, that would think that Trump's brand of politics is appealing. I hope I got that out correctly. But that and uh, do you think that there would have been a President Trump if not for the Tea Party? Um, yes. At first, I was going to say no, but when Noah brought up that he thinks that Trump still would have won, I also thought about that and thought that his reasons for running probably weren't as tied to, the formation of the Tea Party. Probably did help influence his political opinions and um, uh, the platform that he'd want to run on, especially the anti-Obama rhetoric from the Tea Party. But he probably still would have wanted to get the attention of running for president somehow. Do I think he would have won though? I don't know. I don't know if he would have won the nomination just because I think that the Tea Party helped establish the foundation for within the Republican Party for picking more populist conservative nominees, especially with this is in the portfolio for number 9, but the Virginia Tea Party, for example, one of their strategies was trying to replace delegates in the Virginia Republican Party with Tea Party sympathizers one by one. And I think actions like that before 2015, when Trump joined or tried to join the Republican primary, uh, actions like that back, before then helped lay the foundation for him being able to be nominated. Because even in our timeline in 2016, he still had an uphill battle and had a lot of establishment Republican elites trying to pull levers against him. That is true. Um, it just didn't work because there was enough people who liked his energy that kind of overcame that. But maybe in this timeline where there's no Tea Party, that wouldn't have happened. But yeah.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, I honestly this is the question that I wanted to answer the most, this next one. So hopefully I can give y'all some talking points to go off of here. But do you think that a left-wing group could mimic the efforts of the Tea Party and find the same success within the Democratic Party? Should they? And if so, how? Why or why not? Now, in my opinion, I might have mentioned this earlier, the current if okay, because if you look at other democratic democracies across the world, they actually have, well, first they have more than two parties, and second, those two parties are, there's actual, those multiple parties, the actual variation within them. The American Democratic Party, in my opinion, is quantifiably a center right party. And I think that is the problem as to why they could not exactly mimic what the GOP was able to do. Firstly, because again, a lot of the people who it's proven, the more educated you are, the more likely you are to vote left because you're able to read into a lot more societal things. So it's a lot harder to coerce people into a giant hive mind mentality like the GOP was able to do with Trump. So I don't think that they could mimic the Tea Party in the exact same way. Sh- uh, should they? Absolutely, they should. For years, the Democratic Party has, and especially in the last, 15 years, I would say since 2010, there's a common saying that's like, we go high, they go, or when they go low, we go high. So it's like the GOP will find all of the ways to undercut and do everything possible, even if it means like slightly breaking democratic processes and stuff like that, to ensure that they can win and usurp power from the Democrats. But the Democrats never do it back themselves. I think that it's time that they just say, screw that. They've, this is what American politics is. If they do what they want to do and, they will do anything to win, I think that the Democrats should do the exact same thing. And I think that they should not radicalize to the same degree, because if you radicalize more to the left, like you become almost, communist, but they should at least start to lean more to the left and go away from the traditional American Democratic Party to make, because that's another problem with the Democratic Party in the United States, is that a lot of the people who vote for the left are disillusioned with what it actually means to be a Democrat in the United States. Um, because, for example, the most prime example of this is that if you speak to most of the people who voted on the left of on what their opinion on the Israel-Palestine situation is, they think that the United States should have no involvement in Palestine, or in Israel, in Palestine. And but the thing is that if Kamala Harris had been elected, she would have been equally involved in Palestine regardless, because that's how the United States operates. So again, the American left is very disillusioned with the Democratic Party. So I don't think it's feasible to do the exact same thing. Should they? Yes, they should, because then you could actually have a movement that could compete against this Trumpism machine.
So, not to play like devil's advocate, but okay, I'll just answer the questions in like in order too. But do I think that they can mimic the efforts of the Tea Party? I think they could if they really like wanted to, because I mean it doesn't the way that the Tea Party had done it, it wasn't like a grand scheme or anything. I'm pretty sure they could like mimic those same like efforts and same like thinking processes. And then um I don't think that they should necessarily like mimic it, just because I think that at first it would start off as like was no way like you were saying like they like go higher and like do things that are like actually like beneficial and like working towards their party goals and aligns with what they want. But I think there's a point where someone could probably take it like too far and then turn to like using like manipulation tactics, and then like it would go far from like what it was originally supposed to be, because people can get greedy.
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing that on the current, Democrat or Republican American right. We're seeing that where they are taking it too far, but I don't even, obviously that sort of thing would happen, but I think that they could still do it in a way where they don't go too far, but they still do some of the things that the Republicans do to try and gain power.
Yeah, I think that they could mimic the efforts and find the same successes. Um, Could they mimic? Yes. Do I think they'd find the same success? I don't think so. I do think that the Democratic Party base, even the primary voting base, generally tends to be older and more centrist. Of course, that could change if like more younger or generally more progressive or left-leaning people involve themselves in the primary process over time. Um, but as of now, if is a left-wing faction within the party tried to nominate maybe like more explicitly. I wouldn't want to say progressive because I feel like that might be too broad, maybe more like left leaning in general. Candidates, more explicitly left leaning candidates, I should say, left wing, um, they probably just would not be accepted by the base in the same way that the base really accepted and loved the Tea Party's ideas of populism and nationalism, you know, ideas on taxes, etc. Should they? Yes. Um, Only though, on the condition that it would be an organized effort, because I do think that the hive mind tendencies or and the groupthink tendencies of sort of like I guess right wing Tea Partiers, not to paint too much of a broad brush, but I think that works out better for these sort of like mass political movements in terms of organizing something as uh, complex as an insurgent takeover of a party. I think that American left wing groups are a bit too divided and a bit too um, uh, they fight amongst themselves too much to find much success, in my opinion, unless that changes. Um, yes, I answered that.
Um, I think that a left-wing group like as well could like mimic the efforts of the Tea Party. I just think it's just based on like how well people are educated about being like left wing, because like Democrats like it's been like you said they're more kind of like moderate center, and so that I feel like it depends on if people are educated on that. And I feel like also that especially after this election, I feel like it depends on how people feel like if they could go more left wing, because now we're like extreme right wing, and some people might want to try to like counteract that by keep going, try to go left and try to like not be so like extremist. And I think they should try. I think they should, but I just don't think currently I feel like it's like 50-50 if they actually be successful or not, especially after like the election and like also like just the left just being divided and not really having like one cohesive like group or a set of ideas within like the left wing.
Okay, if no one else wants to add on to that, we could move on to the Unit 10 Trump era questions. Okay. I'll go ahead and open this up. What did you know, if anything, about the political scandals and or impeachment charges brought against Trump by the Democrats or other topics covered in the corruption of Lindsey Graham? Okay, well, I just remember the entire impeachment trial leading up to the 2020 election. I remember how the right wing, like in the United States, was trying to spin that as like almost like a witch hunt in a way of, Donald Trump. They were trying to, accuse him when in reality, like he was, the whole situation with the Ukraine and how he was like trying to dig up things on Hunter Biden, asking Zelensky for like a favor on Hunter Biden, like just that entire thing, all of his political scandals. The For me, the writing was just on the wall. That's what I knew about it. I knew that Trump was being heavily scrutinized in his first term, and then, I mean, just the pendulum swing to this second term, though, is absolutely ridiculous because he's essentially just made everyone forget. It's like the thing in Men in Black where you press the button and people are just like, huh? Like that's literally what it is. And yeah, so it's pretty crazy, but
Yeah, I grew up in a house where my mom always had the TV on to some sort of news channel. So there's always like a news chyron flashing in my living room that I would read every now and then. And I just remember whenever that was happening, especially during the first impeachment trial, I remember it was, like you said, it was about him trying to pressure Zelensky, which was very funny how, their relationship ended up now. Because back then I didn't even know what a Zelensky was, but he tried to pressure him to, I think, give dirt on Hunter Biden because he was scared of running against Joe Biden in the election, which I guess turned out to be correct. Um, and I also know about the second impeachment trial, which I think was the first time that's happened ever, if I'm pretty sure. Two impeachments on one president, and it was trying to hold him accountable for January 6th, but we also know how that ended up. But yeah, all I really knew was pretty surface level things you'd read on a headline. So it was really interesting listening to the podcast and finding out the sort of inner workings and the nitty gritty of the details of how things worked in the background.
I agree. I also had very surface level information before looking into the podcast, but yeah, I just knew about, Trump's previous two impeachment trials that he had going on, and I didn't really know too much about it before, but I'm glad I was able to like really be educated on it now. Did you guys want to get into the question B, or did we want to like anybody else want to say anything?
Yeah.
I'm
If anyone,
good
yeah,
with going on question B.
sure.
Okay, I can start. It was saying, in your opinion, what were the most interesting, surprising, maddening, etc. aspects of Lindsey Graham's behavior that was covered in the podcast? And personally, I just noticed that he was very like wishy-washy. He just couldn't pick a side. I thought it was kind of upsetting to see like how he was so stern on his thoughts about Trump being a bigot, like you guys mentioned earlier, and how he was really calling him out on his behavior in the beginning. But then he just switched. And then there was a specific note that was in the podcast where the narrator was talking about like how Graham couldn't, if he couldn't be president, he wanted to help shape the person who was going to be president. And like this just really made it seem like it just showed his character. Like if you cannot be in that position of power, you want to try to shape and try to like just be in the shadows working to like it was just so vindictive. I don't know. It was very vindictive and it just seemed like he was plotting and I didn't like that, but yeah.
I think like one of the like I guess not oh my God. I can't put my question. Like I don't know if not surprising, but I guess yeah, I guess surprising because I think on episode 6 it was Insurrection Day for Lindsey Graham and then um remember like one of the lines or in the podcast, it was like saying that he knew that when Trump was like claiming like voter fraud, it literally said like Lindsey Graham, he was like saying how like that's a serious allegation and like you're gonna get a lot of like I guess like a lot of heat for it and like it's not like smart at all to like claim that. But then what does he do? He like literally like agrees with him and was like, yeah, like actually like this like was a possibility like this happened and that um like he was just on his side about it even though like he knows it's just weird because it's like he knows what's wrong but he still like compromises the ethics or like the morality of it.
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, you go
whoa,
ahead.
my bad, brother.
No, you're fine.
I
You're
know.
fine.
Um,
Mm.
yeah, so my opinion on again, maddening. That's just how you can describe this entire last couple of sections. But like the way that Lindsey Graham literally outlined exactly what was gonna happen and then was like so anti against this and then just immediately like flips the switch 2018 like they said in the podcast 2018 he's walking out at and endorsing Trump for the 2020 election. um this guy is just one of the most spineless individuals in American politics, point blank period. Like uh, the way that he was just attacking um American institutions like James Comey, that was brought up in the podcast, how he was one of the main catalysts of getting him out of his position as head of the CIA when he had, been there for a very long time. Like that was just unbelievable to me. And the way that another one that is just like insane and just like perfectly defines this man is how he was noted on calling Trump like a liar, behind his back, whilst he would still go out in public and defend him openly. So like that just like speaks volumes to what the current GOP has developed into. I think Lindsey Graham is like a perfect example of everything wrong currently with the American right.
Yeah, I think Lindsey Graham is also a perfect example of the classic slimy politician who flip-flops um, on a dime to better his own career. Definitely really, again, surprising isn't the word. I guess maddening is a really good word. I never really thought to use that, but I feel like it fits because um, just seeing how shamelessly he switched opinions that were from one opposite end to the other, um, in a way that just seemed too unnatural and seemed to just be more seems that he's more concerned with his own personal um, career ambitions than any sort of mission to serve the public interest. You know, but I guess I shouldn't be surprised.
I
But
think what,
yeah,
oh,
no,
I'm
you go
sorry.
ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, I think it's just also crazy, like how like two-faced he is, and like during like the insurrection, how he was just like Graham was just saying that, like repeating what Trump was saying that the election was like rigged and stolen, and then but like behind like closed doors, he'd be saying he was w willing to like invoke the 25th Amendment on Trump, and it's like you just openly, like we said, like you openly support him like out in the public. But then like behind closed doors, you're like, yeah, I will if I have to, like invoke the 25th Amendment if I have to. And it's just like this dude is like is just crazy.
Yeah. If everyone's done, I think we can go ahead and answer the last one. Question 8. Question 7 says it's optional. But if no one minds, I find the backsliding and constitutional crisis section to be pretty interesting. If anyone objects,
Yeah,
we
let's
speak
do it.
now. All right, I'll start. So, which of the examples about Trump's executive overreach during his first 100 days in office were new, surprising, interesting, upsetting, etc.? Um, Something that definitely was upsetting that he actually tried to go through it, even though it might not end up working out, but still concerning was his attempt at ending birthright citizenship through executive order. Um, Something that is as explicitly clear in the Constitution as you can get. Definitely, I feel like is sort of a what's the word, canary in the coal mine for his shamelessness in trying to push the boundaries as far as possible, because every time he attempts some sort of executive overreach or sort of dictatorship type move, pundits everywhere say, "Oh, he won't do that. That's too extreme. He won't do that. That doesn't make any sense." Blah blah blah. And then he gets in office, and then he tries to end birthright citizenship, or um, he tries to implement across the board economy destroying tariffs through executive order instead of through Congress as it's supposed to be, um, or trying to dismantle the Department of Education through executive order as well. I think it's definitely a sign that we are only seeing the beginning of them trying to push the boundaries of essentially trying to have unlimited, unchecked power in the executive office.
Yeah, I just watched a John Oliver piece on like how he's like destroying how him and RFK Jr. are destroying like the CDC and all of our health organizations. And this is a guy who, when he came to his hearing, ran on a basis of like saying that he was going to improve American health. But they're just actively destroying all of our institutions whilst like, and they don't even know what they're doing. Like the craziest part is that they came out and were like, they're asking in an interview, they're asking RFK like, hey, like, why did you get rid of this? Like, this is gonna affect like millions of people who like need medical care. And they're like, he didn't even know that that happened. And he was like, oh, like, yeah, we'll work on that and like we'll reinstate that. So like they're just making completely unfounded decisions for no other reason other than saving money. Like I saw one thing where like in a Doge meeting, which is just a complete other shit show for a lack of words, but um how they were bringing up how they were going to give institutions, like they wanted to give more money to scientists for research and less money to the like institutions, aka universities, to actually complete these studies. But the thing is when you take money away from giving the institutions, like it's like who's going to pay to keep the lights on? Who's going to pay to have the computers running to actually do this research? So like it's just completely backwards, and everything that they're doing is just a complete disaster. I mean, look at the world economy. We crashed it for absolutely zero reason. My eggs are $5. I don't get it, you know.
Um, I am going to answer the second part of that question, and then you guys can take over the other two questions. But in your opinion, how concerned are you that our political parties and our political institutions and rules will be unable to provide the checks and balances required in a functioning liberal democracy? Um, I do think that our sort of institutional guardrails are probably a lot stronger than a lot of other countries. Like Hungary, for example. I keep hearing about Hungary a lot as an example as to how a backsliding democracy in America would look, since they also similarly had a leader who pushed the boundaries of their institutions to try and get unchecked executive power. I don't think that it would be as easy to do that here, but I do think that it is possible, and I think that it really just depends on how hard people are that have power within our institutions are willing to fight for them, um, and how far they're willing to push back in you know um, without worrying too much about norms and uh, conduct, um, and caring more about providing action to actually try and do the stuff required to protect our democracy as much as possible. Um, I think it's possible, but like I said, it requires it isn't going to happen on its own. It's going to require people with power to step up and do the right thing. And will they? I can't tell you.
Did we complete the entire required?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, that was it. So I think we're good.
Yep. Okay.
All
Well,
right. Nice
All
meeting
right,
you.
well, yeah, good work, everybody.
yeah.
Yeah.
Never
Yeah.
have to do this again,
Yeah,
thank God.
Yes.
Sorry,
yeah.
Professor. Love you,
All
Professor
right,
Brenkoff. You're cool. All right.
all right. Have a good
I'll
day,
see y'all.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.